The modern world has trained us to scroll endlessly, but the human mind wasn't built for scrolling. It was built for reading. Now, there's a paradox here. In the modern information economy, we're constantly inundated with information on social media, in the news, everywhere we go. We are constantly bombarded with text, fact, information. But a lot is missing. We're not getting the comprehensive information we used to. We're getting constant bite-sized, fast-paced content designed for consumption, designed to keep us scrolling. It's reduced our attention spans. It's led to this transactional approach where we're constantly reading in order to reply or in order to react, rather than to understand, rather than to change our minds, rather than to make something more of ourselves. This is particularly a problem in universities, in debate fields, anywhere that requires critical thinking skills. The problem seems overwhelming. Like there's so much information, and there's no integration of the information. And that's where deep reading comes in. Reading is built on pre-existing neural circuits. These circuits evolved for spoken language. We have Broca's area, which is correlated with grammar and speech production. Wernicke's area is more related to comprehension. We have a visual cortex as well, connected to word recognition. But the human brain is literally designed for us to read, process, comprehend, and make tangible changes based on what we read. So when we read, the brain's mapping this visual information onto sounds, meanings, ideas, and this is like hacking evolution in a way. True deep reading is not like the bite-sized information that we're so used to in our scrolling culture. It piggybacks on these circuits, on Broca's area, Wernicke's area, the visual cortex, and creates a system that's designed for language and social cognition. Now, the reason all of this matters is because it's directly related to focus. Now, in the world we are occupying where there's so much information and so little integration, it's very hard to focus. It's very hard to remain on one topic for a sustained period of time. This is something that, used to be very common, and nowadays it seems rarely to happen. We get one piece of information, and very next thing you know, you're scrolling, and it's a completely different piece of information. Now, I don't think most of us realize just how out of sync this is with the way our mind is naturally designed. You're scrolling, you see one piece of information, maybe it's something literature related, and then a millisecond later, you've scrolled up, and now you're looking at something related to history, and now you're looking at something, related to the modern news, and then you're looking at, a cat video, and then you're looking at something music related. It's just constant bombardment, inundation of information. And that's not how our minds were designed. They were designed to focus. Our circuits require deep processing, not shallow scanning. And the problem is, we're so stuck in the scanning mode. That's why a book is really the key here. It's the cure in many ways to our constant scrolling, our constant inundation with information. Because reading a book, a real book, requires deep processing. It requires sustained attention, and it requires you to be able to actually change your neurocircuits based on the process of the information. This is very different than scrolling. Scrolling in many ways is like it's just it's just it's just sense information. When you're scrolling, a lot of times you're just getting sensory information. You're not comprehending it. If somebody asked you after scrolling, what was the content of the last 15 reels that you looked at? How many of us are confident that we'd be able to any degree of accuracy, tell that person what the content of those things were? Maybe one or two moments would stand out. And yet when you're reading, when you're deep reading, that's not the case. Of course, your mind can wander, you can miss a paragraph, but generally speaking, we know what we're reading, we know what is happening. That's why physical books are so important. Having physical books in your life, you pick up a book and you read it. It changes you. It's not something that is just momentary. It's not this flash, but we're used to these flashes just constantly scrolling. Another reason why it's so important is our minds were designed for storytelling. Now, don't get me wrong, there's a lot of very creative storytelling that can be done in short bursts. Short stories can be comedic, they can be, moving, they can be interesting, but our minds are designed to really comprehend deep, stimulating stories. Think about oral traditions, myths in, all sorts of societies, indigenous societies around the world, social gossip. All of these stories, they let us learn about how to operate in the world. We predict other people's information or other people's behavior based on the information in the stories. We learn to practice empathy. We learn complex scenarios, moral lessons. I mean, how many of the great fairy tales have deep moral lessons embedded in them? Reading a book activates these same mental stimulations. It's much more intense, though. It's much different, qualitatively different than the fragmented snippets that we see when we're online, when we're going from one to another, to another, to another, to another, to another, constantly going. Your brain literally simulates the story world. That's the reason why reading is so powerful because, as good a writer as the writer is, they're only giving you pieces of information and you're not going to be able to get to the depth of everything that's going on. You have to imagine what's happening. You have to add your own information, which is why it's a creative act, reading a truly reading a novel or a book, because you're imagining moments, you're imagining things that are being described to you that you don't have access to. You're filling in the gaps. And those gaps, and sometimes, are just as important as the actual words that you're reading, the actual information that you're given. So you're a partner in this act of creation. But being a partner requires focus and cognitive depth. If we're scrolling for on social feeds, our mind is it's rapidly shifting attention. Dopaminergic systems are just flowing and flowing and flowing. It's bursts for novelty. We're seeking novelty. And our brains are really good at seeking novelty, right? But reading, it's the opposite. It's, again, sustained. It can be sustained attention for minutes or days in some cases, right? Sometimes you're reading books for hours at a time over a series of days. That's something that used to be more common. It's amazing how much it affects your memory, your working memory, your critical thinking skills. Cognitively, reading is one of the greatest things we can do. And it also connects ideas. It connects you with ideas across paragraphs, chapters, sometimes across books, because great authors will often reference other books. There's so many allusions between, a great work of literature will reference other ones, or even works of literature that might be considered more lowbrow. I'm not a classist here. I really think that reading is amazing, and some novels are definitely more derivative than others, but they're derived from other great novels, and so it's important to read even if we're just, even like Stephen King famously said, read no matter what, even if you're reading trash. And I think he's right in a certain way. It's better to read better books, and being a book snob, I'm not against that. But reading, it develops analytical thinking. Of course, you got to understand the plot, the argument, the characters' motives, whatever. You have to get better at memory consolidation because you're sustaining this over a long period of time. So it's not like you can just scroll and forget the last reel. It's like, well, you have to remember what happened in the last chapter, or you might get confused. Also requires a certain degree of emotional intelligence. And I talked before a little bit about empathy, right? But the reason you're developing empathy when you read a sustained book is you're kind of inhabiting the perspective of different characters. Even if it's just for a couple of minutes that you're reading a book, right? You can activate more neural networks just by reading for 10, 15 minutes than you can for scrolling for a whole day, right? At the end of the day, the reason reading is a cure to this constant information that we're stuck with in our modern world. It's not about information. We have lots of information. We have lots of words that we're reading. In the words of Shakespeare, words, 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 right? That we're reading. But we don't have the wisdom, right? It's it's not just the stimulation. Reading is about enjoyment, meaning, purpose. And I think one of the things we often think is that we have to fight our addictions. We have to go as hard as we can against scrolling or as hard as we can against something that we don't want to be doing, and we're constantly doing it because of the dopaminergic systems. And I think, scrolling or constantly seeking out news and information is one of the biggest addictions a lot of people are suffering with today. But I don't think that's the way we can actually deal with it. We have to pivot. We can't fight it. We have to pivot away from it. And that's where books are really the cure. because it's an ancient system, thousands of years old. Humans have been reading for a long time. Our neural networks, our whole, neural infrastructure is built to be able to read in a sustained fashion and get a lot out of reading. And so reading, in a way, is a cure to all of these social ailments that we suffer with today. It's a cure to anxiety because it allows for calm contemplation, right? It's a cure for overstimulation because it forces focus. It's a cure for scrolling because it requires sustained engagement. So my call to action here is simple. If you're watching this and you feel overwhelmed or anxious, overstimulated, tired, go pick up a book, something meaningful to you. At this point, it doesn't matter. If it's highbrow, lowbrow, something you love, and read. Read quietly. Read for a few minutes or for a few hours, but read. The next time you find yourself doom scrolling, don't shame yourself. Pivot. Turn off your device, power it down for an hour, and read. You'll thank me later. Take care, guys.